In this video, we finish up yet another army for the Miniac channel in 2023, despite my utter lack of project and time management skills. If I can do it, you can do it too. Up until this point, I've been painting single models because that's been fun for me personally. I did paint one full unit of my nautical boys and girls, but it was pure suffer, so I went back to my comfortable hole of display painter playing around in the sandbox of army painting. And my viewers are my parents who are yelling at me saying, "Stop eating the sand!" Where the sand is me painting one model at a time while trying to finish an army. Are you following this thematically appropriate sand-based metaphor?
I don't like sand.
Tell me I'm clever, please! Look like a gremlin. I have a battle report coming up that will use this army, hence the motivation to stop eating sand and begin eating plastic shovels, also found in sandboxes, which in this long, drawn-out metaphor is batch painting. Nothing kills my hobby mojo quite like batch painting, but it's a necessary evil, so let's get to it. First project on the chopping block is a unit of archers. I started with a base coat of a dark blue color, skipping over the primer step, which will come back to bite me in the sandy ass cheek. I then hit the whole model with a uniform zenithal layer of brown. With that complete, I started to selectively pick out parts of the model with a cream highlight, still with the airbrush. A little overspray here doesn't bother me, as we'll solve this in future steps. On certain spots where overspray would have been a larger problem, I just use a brush to apply this color. I've painted a single archer in the past, not very shocking, I know, but this is actually super helpful for me because I have a target color layout in mind that I know I like. This allows me to look at the model and make some observations to best plan out my scheme, which is so much more than the paints and techniques being used. As someone who doesn't believe in planning, taking notes, and in general, project management, trust me when I say a test model for a unit you plan to batch paint is worth its weight in gold. Also, I know project management is valuable, but I'm horrible at it, and to protect my own ego, I say it's bad. What should we do about all that white overspray? Transparent acrylic products to the rescue. Using some Vallejo Express paint, I was able to take advantage of my overspray by getting a jump start on my turquoise, which I later highlighted with more normal acrylic paint. I also used other similar products from different companies to do the same for my black pants and the gray skirt thing. Look, I'm not gonna bother to correctly identify articles of clothing if the model itself is confused about which bit of fabric goes where and came from where. I boosted the highlights on the tan parts beyond their airbrush layer, and for certain parts of the model that got slammed with overspray, like the quivers on their back, I kind of just used that color as a way to assist my painted highlights. I used a thinner paint and glazed it on effectively. For the metal, I simply base coated the majority of it, but for the chainmail, I did some overbrushing, which is basically dry brushing, but with a little more paint in the bristles. I find that I can also be more accurate with it, which is important at this stage in the paint plan. Lastly, I felt like I was lacking some definition on the central core of the model, around its torso and head, so I broke out a last-minute Payne's Gray oil wash and applied it to some of those important recesses to clean up the curb appeal of the model. Lastly, I varnished the models because that seems like a good idea for gaming figures, and I rarely take time to do it. I used a mixture of satin and matte varnish from Vallejo to get a finish I liked, and bang, a unit complete. This unit in my army is basically here to die. I put a hero in that unit with a special rule called Poisoned Gifts, which gives the unit some cookies that I can dole out to other units that actually matter. The poison of this gift, however, is whenever they do anything in-game, one guy has to die. Take a move, someone dies. Shoot some enemies, there's another archer dead. Eat some sand, rip Steven. Sure, they have weapons, but they're more of a metaphorical representation of the ongoing conflict, which is a nice way of saying they don't do shit. Oh, now, those archers are on bases. Where do those come from? We'll find out after a message from this video's sponsor. If you've been anywhere near the 3D printing space over the last few years, and you've probably heard about today's sponsor, Elegoo, and their latest addition to the Saturn line of resin 3D printers, the Saturn III Ultra 12K. The new Saturn III Ultra boasts a 12K resolution mono LCD display with a pixel size of 19 by 24 microns, which is nerd for this is one crispy printer. This resolution stretches across a large build volume, meaning you can fit a lot of minis on the plate at once. Additionally, this new printer features a new type of film in the vat. This ACF film is able to more easily separate your ongoing print layer from the FEP, which in turn causes less tearing force on your in-progress print. Because of this decreased adhesion, you're able to increase your lift speeds, which in turn results in a faster print. You'd be surprised how many hours you can shave off of a print by a very minimal increase in lift speed. Combine that with Elegoo's rapid resin, and you could potentially print off models much more quickly. This film is also purportedly more durable than your standard FEP, meaning less replacements. To achieve ultra-steady printing performance, the Saturn Ultra 12K features dual linear guide rails on the Z-axis as opposed to just one, which helps to discourage any kind of build plate movement that isn't intentional. Additionally, these rails feature ball screws as opposed to lead screws. These ball screws feature rails that are much more rigid, reducing movement, and use ball bearings which reduce friction on the rails and the screw itself, meaning less maintenance needs to occur and yet more stability. While not necessarily a new feature, I was pleasantly surprised to find an in-unit filter that will help with resin smells if that's a concern of yours. Furthermore, this device has Wi-Fi built in. No more carting over thumb drives like a dingus. Well, you can, it still has support for USB drives, but you don't have to, and instead you can send files to the printer wirelessly with the supported slicing software. Thank you to Elegoo for sponsoring this video, and if you want to learn more or pick up a Saturn III Ultra 12K, you can do so at the link in the description below. All right, back to how I based my army up. A while back, I made some custom bases for my army that I molded in silicone and am now casting in plastic. I'll link the video that goes into more detail in the description if you're curious. The plastic cures in 10 minutes, and then with a little sanding, it's ready for paint. There were a few larger bases that I needed to scratch make with a styrene disc that I cut out with my circle cutter, balsa wood that I distressed first and then trimmed to size, and some basing texture. Since the balsa wood gets a little unruly after weathering it with an X-Acto knife, I like to seal it all in with super glue thin. With all the bases ready to go, I taped them to a larger sheet so I could paint and manipulate them all at the same time. First, I began with the primer because the base gets handled more than any part of the model, and any amount of extra paint adhesion isn't going to hurt me. I base coated them with an airbrush in an ochre color and fired a highlight from the front side. I'm hoping to catch all those nicely sculpted, windswept sand waves that I included in the original masters. With that done, I applied some orange and turquoise transparent acrylic paint to the seashells, this time contrast paint from GW, some brown for the wooden decking elements on some of the bases, this time from Army Painter, and lastly, I airbrushed a little bit of blue on the bases that are supposed to dip down into some more shallow water. I stuck on some tufts for some diversity and also added some Mod Podge dimensional magic to the blue areas to represent the water. After the painting was done, it was time to glue the little discs into their final bases and pin the models in place. Sometimes I'm able to pop these models out of their manufactured bases, leaving behind a little pin to reuse for my purposes. Other times that little knob gets sheared straight off and I do my own pinning with paper clips. I kind of wish I had gone a little brighter with my airbrushed sand highlight. The bases look and feel a little lackluster, almost like I simply base coated the sand just one color. I also had to do this for the movement trays as well. It's been a hot minute since I've painted a movement tray, but the process was largely the same as the smaller bases. I applied a lot of texture paste that I scraped off the edges to maintain that pristine rim. To make the trays thematically special, I glued down some seashells and other nautical bits I found foraging on a beach one day. Then it was business as usual. Ochre base coat, brighter frontal highlight, and so on. I also had to paint the rims of the movement tray, which was pretty satisfying. Here's what the archers look like in a tray all based up. Some people may dislike the black base rim, citing that it breaks the immersion of the beach setting. That could be true, but the fact that both the base and the movement trays have included black parts make it feel more like an intentional artistic choice, which seems to solve that problem in my head for me. But what do you think? Would you have gone with a more camouflaged color? All right, let's fix some problems. Later last year, I accidentally spilled the same plastic I used to cast my bases all over many of the painted character minis for this army, and since then, I've been a very sad little man, until I realized that maybe I could fix some of these in very simple ways. The models in question have issues only on the top halves, mostly their heads. So off camera, I repainted one of the characters' heads, chopped off both heads, the new and old one, and with some clever X-Acto blade shaping, I was able to glue it on pretty convincingly. With some paint to more closely align the two different paint jobs, we have a pretty good repair job. I'd recommend not painting the face before doing this if you happen to also spill plastic on your model's head and need to paint another one and replace it like this. This is very, very useful advice. Anyways, I very obviously caused some damage to the new head's paint job, so on the second one, I did just that. I cut off an unpainted head and replaced the damaged one and got it painted up while it was glued on. Now both characters are alive again and not covered in a mysterious white goo. Don't be weird, I'm not implying anything. Some other models were a little too far gone and required whole repaints, and that happened before filming this video. All right, on to the last and my personal favorite unit for finalizing this army, the Iron Makers. If it hasn't been obvious up until this point, I'm painting Greyjoy models from the game A Song of Ice and Fire. When I was first getting into this game with my friend Curtis, I had to pick a faction, and the best way that I know how to do that is by picking what I think looks cool. I've seen seasons 1 and some of season 2 of Game of Thrones and haven't read any of the books, so I don't really know who any of these dudes are in the game. What convinced me instantly upon seeing it was the concept art for Iron Makers. I thought to myself, it doesn't matter what the rest of the army looks like, I'll perform whatever mental gymnastics required to convince myself that the whole army is cool just so I can use these guys. It worked well for me because plenty of the other units are also awesome, like the dreaded Silenced Men with their hoods, face coverings, and big old axes. For 7 points, Iron Makers aren't better than their equivalently costed Silenced Men brethren, but it'd feel weird to not include Iron Makers in my first official Greyjoy list, so here we are. Instead of going through the paint job step by step because there were a lot of mistakes, I'll explain just the highlights. Just like the archers, I had already painted one Iron Maker before this point, and it was actually the first Greyjoy model I ever painted. First mistake, I base coated the model in an acrylic paint without primer. I alluded to this in the beginning of the video. This normally hasn't been an issue for me in the past, but after dry brushing with silver, the aggressive paint method tore the base layer right off. To solve this, I added a few drops of matte varnish directly into the blue paint and reapplied it, and that worked magnificently. I didn't even wait longer than 30 minutes to begin dry brushing and had zero issues at this stage. Later on in the paint plan, I started to notice that I was rubbing paint off of the cloaks of the model. This could be due to the fact that I wasn't using painting handles to distance myself from the Mini. I find that if I ever cause paint to rub off of a model, it's always on the back like this, primer or not, so it's hard to say if this is a me problem or something else. For details that are important, like the tabard on the front of this model or this model's prominent armored arm, I took some more time to get nice crispy lines of definition by painting recessed shading into the deepest parts. For other regions on this model, washing, layering, or zenithally applying an airbrush layer are good enough for some basic definition. Spend time where it matters most. My first step in the process was dry brushing because it was messy, which means that later on in the process there was some overspray on the silver. This doesn't really matter as a quick layer of highlight over that looks just fine. On areas where it was easy to access with a dry brush, I applied my highlights to the silver with dry brushing. Even though we're using the same color at this stage of the paint plan, the application technique can vary. That and the order of operations matters. Think about how repairing a previous step can be a step to finish another part. Maximum efficiency. Also, metallic paint blends super easily with some stippling, which I did to all of their helmets. I'm not sure why it feels so easy, but with some slightly diluted paint, it just kind of fades into the darker metal really nicely. Slap some blood on these big hammer boys, attach them to their bases, and bang. We have a fully painted Greyjoy army. 2 armies in 1 year. How many of you believe that this would happen? Like I mentioned earlier in the video, this army is getting painted up for a battle report of A Song of Ice and Fire, which has actually already been filmed as of the release of this video. The long-awaited episode 2 of Kill Your Friends is finally happening, and it makes sense to play this game that's been captivating me and my friends the last couple of years. I'm beginning to discover corners that I originally cut and kind of regret when it comes to army painting. Sadly, nothing specific, but I think I would have been happier spending more time on his armor to make it look 10% better, like my Age of Sigmar army. That's okay though. Everything we paint is an opportunity to learn and take those lessons forward. And now I know vaguely where my tastes draw the line, which is an important thing for you and I to discover as an individual. You might be looking at this army thinking, it looks fine, and I mostly agree. I just want a bit more polish for me and my preferences. That's gonna do it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of the video. Let me know what you think about the army. And also, if you like this video, I have another one that's similar to it linked at the end of this video, where I paint my Age of Sigmar army, the Soulblight Gravelords. If you like this video and you want to support this channel and also the future creation of videos like this, the best way to do that is check out my Patreon, where you get fun rewards like access to a Discord server where you and I can hang out and chat about your miniature painting projects any day of the week, or your favorite miniature war game right now that you're painting your army for. My patrons are awesome people, and because they're awesome, the Discord server that they occupy is also equally as awesome. I'm so thankful for all the support that I get from you guys, which enables me to make a lot of videos about games that aren't that popular, like A Song of Ice and Fire, compared to much more popular intellectual properties. So for that freedom, which is so important, honestly, thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it. You can also see a lot of the products that I use for my hobby linked down in the description. Those are affiliate links, and when you purchase items using those links, I get a little kickback and no extra cost to you. You can also check out my website, miniac.co, where we sell shirts, hoodies, other products like a double-sided cutting mat, and all kinds of stuff. This isn't like a Teespring or a Redbubble. We go out and find local manufacturers for these products, source them in this office, and ship them out of this office. It's all done under this roof. And so we take a lot of pride in the quality that we find from our various manufacturers, and also the quality control that we do here in the office. And sometimes we get it wrong, and when we do get it wrong, someone emails us and we are quick to correct it. So a lot of ways you can support the channel, all things linked down in the description. But most importantly, don't forget to...